I manage 62 luxury hotels across 4 continents, but my entire empire began to crumble, not in a boardroom, but in a London lobby, over a single $450 charge. The stale, recycled air of the lobby always smelled faintly of industrial-strength lemon cleaner and desperation. I was running the Grand Majestic Hotel chain, all 62 properties spread across 4 continents, and yet this particular Tuesday morning in the London flagship felt like a masterclass in mundane suffering. My name is Alistair Finch. I inherited this empire from my father, a man whose only discernible talent was maintaining a facade of impeccable, if utterly hollow, politeness. I, however, prided myself on efficiency, and sometimes efficiency required a certain firmness. I was walking the floor, my bespoke Italian shoes barely whispering on the marble, i.e. checking the morning reports against the physical reality of the place. Everything looked fine. Too fine, perhaps. That's when I saw her. She was standing at the check-in desk, and the junior manager on duty, a nervous young man named Philip, was visibly sweating under her gaze. She was perhaps in her late 40s, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Philip's annual salary. But it wasn't the suit that drew my attention. It was the way she held herself. Utter stillness. Authority radiating off her like heat from asphalt. She was clearly a high-value client, perhaps checking out of one of our penthouse suites. "I'm sorry, ma'am," Philip stammered, fiddling with the tablet screen, "but the corporate system is flagging your final invoice for a rather substantial incidental charge. A late checkout fee for the spa facilities, it seems." The woman didn't raise her voice, which was somehow more terrifying than shouting. "Philip," she said, her tone smooth as polished obsidian, "I left the suite at 7 a.m., precisely when my reservation stipulated. The spa staff can confirm this. I was on my way to Heathrow by 7:30 a.m. Please review the security footage, or perhaps review your own competence." I paused my measured stride, deciding this was the perfect opportunity to demonstrate leadership. Philip needed steering, and this guest needed a reminder of who controlled the narrative in my establishments. I approached the desk, radiating an air of practiced, condescending helpfulness. "Good morning, madam. Alistair Finch, general manager," I said, extending a hand that she completely ignored, opting instead to fix me with an unnervingly steady gaze. Her eyes were the color of dark, deep-sea water, beautiful but completely unreadable. "Let's see what minor clerical error we can smooth over for you." I took the tablet from Philip, dismissing him with a flick of my wrist that I hoped looked managerial rather than dismissive. I scanned the invoice. Ah, yes, a $450 late amenity usage fee. Pathetic. "It appears, madam," I began, leaning slightly over the counter, adopting the tone I usually reserved for recalcitrant third-party vendors, "that you utilize the executive lounge facilities until 8:15 a.m., rather than the scheduled 7:30 a.m. departure time attached to your room service confirmation. Our policy is quite clear on sequential booking conflicts." She tapped a long, manicured finger on the marble counter. Tap, tap. The sound echoed in the sudden quiet of the lobby. "Mr. Finch," she said, and using my full name, so smoothly, made the hairs on my arms prickle momentarily. I quickly suppressed the reaction. I had breakfast delivered at 7 a.m. I signed the receipt. I consumed the meal. I then immediately proceeded to the lobby level, which is clearly reflected on your internal keycard logs, which I assume you have full access to. I was waiting for my private car service, which was delayed by 15 minutes due to an accident on the A4. I chuckled, a dry, practiced sound. "Madam, with all due respect, the system doesn't lie. If the keycard registers activity on the executive floor past 7:30, it triggers the automatic assessment. It's a standard deterrent against guests treating our premium spaces like their personal waiting rooms." I let my eyes drift dismissively over her suit, her jewelry, her very presence. "Perhaps you found the lounge comfortable enough to warrant the small surcharge." The air thickened. Philip looked like he was about to faint into the potted ficus. The woman looked from me to Philip, and then back to me. A slow, almost predatory smile stretched across her lips. It wasn't a pleasant smile. It was the smile of a shark realizing it has found a very small, slow-moving fish. "You believe that, Mr. Finch?" she asked. "I believe the technology, madam. It's objective," I stated, pushing the tablet back toward her. "Pay the administrative fee. And we can conclude this transaction." She didn't reach for the tablet. Instead, she reached into her expensive leather handbag and pulled out a small silver device, not a phone, but a small digital key fob, and pressed a single button. "Philip," she commanded, ignoring me completely, "please bring me the general manager's direct office line, not his desk phone, his private line." Philip, bless his terrified soul, scrambled to comply. I felt a surge of indignation. "Madam, you are holding up the line. I am the general manager. You will address—" "Alistair," she interrupted, cutting through my pompous declaration like a laser through tissue paper. Her voice dropped, losing its polished veneer, gaining a dangerous, resonant depth. "Do you know who I am?" "Frankly, I don't care," I snapped, deciding I'd had enough of this theatrical display. "I care that you pay your bills. If you wish to contest the charge, you can email corporate legal. Right now, you are holding up a queue of business travelers who actually respect schedules." She leaned in across the marble, her breath warm and smelling faintly of mint, completely closing the distance between us. "You see me, Alistair, and you see a complication," she murmured, her eyes burning into mine. "You see a black woman in a $4,000 suit demanding accountability, and your immediate knee-jerk reaction is to assume I'm trying to cheat you out of 50 pounds. You think my money is somehow less legitimate, less earned, than the money of the pale, suited financiers you fawn over." I stiffened. How dare she psychoanalyze me in my own lobby? "That is an outrageous assumption, madam. I am merely enforcing policy." She straightened up, a look of profound, chilling disappointment settling on her features. "Ah," Philip returned, shaking violently, holding out the office phone receiver like it was evidence of a crime. She took the receiver and held it, not dialing, just holding it against her ear, listening to the dial tone. Then she looked directly at me, her expression completely flat now. "Alistair Finch, you are an entitled, small-minded man, operating under the illusion of control. You manage 62 properties, yes, but I own the building that houses property number 47 in Singapore, and I own the controlling interest in the REIT that finances the majority of your European portfolio." I felt a cold dread snake down my spine. This wasn't just a wealthy guest complaining. This was someone who knew the architecture of my entire operation. "That's impossible," I managed, my voice catching. She smiled again, that predatory curve of the lips, and finally, she began to dial. She didn't dial a number. She pressed a single, rapid sequence of buttons on the device she'd pulled from her bag earlier, and then seamlessly patched that connection through to the landline receiver in her hand. "Call Mr. Henderson in acquisitions," she said into the receiver, her voice suddenly crisp and purely professional, "and inform him that the Grand Majestic European holdings are up for immediate, full liquidation. I want the paperwork drafted by noon today. Tell him I want to close the deal before I land in Dubai." She paused, listening to the automated confirmation tones on the other end. Then she lowered the phone slightly, her dark eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that felt physically painful. "And as for this $450 fee, Mr. Finch," she continued, her voice dropping back to that terrifyingly intimate level, "I will pay it. But understand this. The management style you displayed this morning, that petty arrogance reserved for those you perceive as beneath you, it's about to become very, very expensive for you." She placed the receiver back in my startled hand, never breaking eye contact. "Now I believe my car is here. You may escort me to the main door, or you can remain here and watch your world, the world your father built, start to unravel before the lunch rush." The weight of the receiver felt like a lead anchor in my palm. The lobby, moments before a symphony of quiet, efficient commerce, had become a vacuum, sucking the air out of my lungs. Alistair Finch, the man who prided himself on being 10 steps ahead of every competitor, every disgruntled guest, every fluctuating stock price, was utterly blindsided. I looked at the phone, then at her. She stood waiting, hands clasped loosely in front of her, an almost bored expression masking whatever turbulent satisfaction she must have felt, witnessing my abrupt, public implosion. Philip was pressed against the marble credenza, his eyes wide with the silent horror of a man who has just witnessed a major geological event. "You wouldn't," I whispered, the sound barely audible over the low hum of the central air conditioning. "You can't just liquidate the European holdings. The paperwork, the due diligence. It would take months." She tilted her head, a gesture of almost clinical interest. "Alistair, my dear boy, you mistake liquidation for sale. Liquidation is immediate. It means severing assets with extreme prejudice. And as for paperwork, I don't use paper when a targeted algorithmic transfer and a few very stern phone calls to your chairman's primary investment banker will suffice. Time, as you so rightly pointed out earlier, is money, and I have a very tight schedule." That phrase, "your chairman's primary investment banker," hit me like a physical blow. My father had built the chain on a foundation of carefully managed debt, leveraging relationships that I thought were unshakable. If she had access to that level of financial leverage, she wasn't just a major shareholder. She was a godmother lurking in the shadows of our corporate structure, waiting for the right moment to strike. "Who are you?" I demanded, finally finding my voice, though it sounded ragged and thin. She finally moved, taking 2 slow steps toward the revolving door. "You know my name, Alistair. Or at least, you know the name I use when I'm checking into a room for a week of overpriced silence. You just never bothered to look past the reservation ticket. My name is Dr. Eleanor Vance. I was the keynote speaker at the Global Hospitality Summit in Zurich last year. You remember Zurich, don't you? You walked right past my table to schmooze with the CEO of Omni Hotels. Zurich. The Omni Hotels CEO. I remembered. Dr. Vance had been introduced to me by a junior associate, a woman of color, mid-40s, sharp, but perhaps not dressed in the $3,000 armor I associated with true power players. I had dismissed her politely, assuming she was an academic or perhaps a mid-level supplier, most eager for a photo-op. I had been charmingly aloof, far too preoccupied with securing a better table for the actual CEO. The recognition dawned, horrifying and complete. Eleanor Vance wasn't just buying hotels. She specialized in hostile takeovers of legacy brands that had become complacent. She didn't just invest, she dismantled and rebuilt in her own image. And I had just insulted her, belittled her, and called her a cheap fraud, trying to dodge a spa fee. "Philip," I managed, trying to salvage some semblance of authority, gesturing vaguely toward the door where Dr. Vance was now standing, waiting patiently. "Escort Dr. Vance to her vehicle. Expedite. Ensure she has a complimentary bottle of our best 20-year-old single malt waiting for her later." Doctor. Vance laughed, a short, sharp sound devoid of humor. "Keep your scotch, Philip. I prefer to drink the tears of obsolete management." She stepped into the revolving door, and I watched her silhouette pass into the London morning. I felt a strange, dizzying compulsion to run after her, to grovel, to offer her my resignation on the spot. Anything to stop the catastrophe she had set in motion. But it was too late. My phone, my private, dedicated office mobile, began to vibrate violently on the marble counter. I snatched it up. The screen displayed a single, terrifying number. +44207, followed by the direct line of Sir Charles Harrington, the chairman of the board, and the man who held my future in his impeccably manicured hands. I answered on the second ring, breathing deeply. "Sir Charles, good morning. I'm just finalizing a rather high-profile departure. Don't you dare try to spin this for me, Alistair." Harrington's voice was a low, furious rumble, completely unlike his usual patrician drone. "I'm looking at an emergency communication from Goldman Sachs, detailing an immediate, unsolicited acquisition offer for 51% of our outstanding stock. An offer that, if accepted, renders the current board, and by extension, you, entirely redundant. They've already presented the term sheet to the shareholders' committee." My knees felt weak. 51%. Control. Gone. "Sir, this is Dr. Vance. She just threatened." "Threatened?" "Alistair, she didn't threaten. She acted. I asked Henderson what this was about. Oh, and he choked out something about a deeply inappropriate interaction with a potential major partner at the London property this morning." "What the devil did you do?" Harrington roared. "This woman, Eleanor Vance, she doesn't just own assets, Alistair. She is the acquisition. She controls more capital than several small nations. I looked back out the glass doors, but Dr. Vance was already disappearing into the black sedan that had pulled up precisely where she needed it to be. I merely corrected an invoicing error, Sir Charles. I called her out on a small charge. I underestimated her. Underestimated her? Harrington's voice became dangerously quiet. Alistair, she didn't just start buying up our debt. She's already leveraged control over the pension fund trustees who hold 20% of the shares. She is moving with such speed and precision that by the time we convene this emergency board meeting, we will be negotiating with our new landlord. He paused, and I could hear the frantic shuffling of papers on his end. Get downstairs, go to the security office, pull the keycard logs for the executive floor, specifically from 6:30 a.m. to 8:30 a.m. I need proof that she was there longer than she claimed. If we can pin her on any fraudulent charge, any technical violation of conduct, we might be able to get an injunction to slow the immediate sale. Do it now, Alistair. Show me you still have a shred of managerial instinct left. My heart hammered against my ribs, my last desperate move. If I could find proof that she had lied, even about the time, maybe I could buy a day, an hour. I sprinted toward the staff elevators, easy pushing the button for the basement security hub. The elevator doors hissed open and I stepped inside. I jabbed the button for B2. The doors slid shut. The car began its descent. Fast, too fast. Then, with a horrible grinding screech, it shuddered violently. The lights flickered once and plunged the small metal box into absolute darkness. The emergency light clicked on, casting my panicked face in a sickly orange glow. I slammed the emergency call button. Static. Nothing. I hammered the button again. Static. I was trapped between floors, and the sound of grinding metal above me suggested that whatever was happening to the hotel, it wasn't limited to the C-suite. Then, over the emergency intercom, cutting through the static with unnerving clarity, came a soft, almost playful voice. It wasn't Sir Charles. Relax, Alistair. Our acquisitions are much smoother when the opposition can't move freely. Don't worry about the logs. I already have them. In fact, I have everything. The voice was Dr. Vance's, and then a new sound joined hers. The rhythmic, slow, mechanical beep, beep, beep of a timer counting down. The mechanical beep, beep, beep. Echoing in the cramped darkness of the stalled elevator was the sound of my final, desperate hope being systematically dismantled. It wasn't a fast countdown, the kind that suggests a bomb. It was slow, deliberate, the sound of patience that had been cultivated over decades of waiting for exactly this moment. "What timer, Doctor?" I shouted into the intercom, my voice tight with panic. "What have you done?" Her voice returned, maddeningly calm, laced with the faint, tinny echo of the elevator's poor acoustics. "That, Alistair, is the timer on the remote override for the main server room's environmental controls. You see, you pride yourself on knowing your physical assets, but you forgot that every physical asset needs a digital spine. I just initiated a thermal overload sequence in the primary server banks located 3 floors beneath you. Nothing explosive, nothing immediately destructive, just enough sustained calculated heat to corrupt the hard drives holding your legacy backups, your customer data, and critically, the unencrypted shareholder proxy votes that were due to be finalized this afternoon." My mind raced, trying to process the sheer brutal scope of her preemptive strike. She hadn't just bought the company, she was erasing the history of ownership in the process. If the legacy data melted, the legal challenges to her hostile takeover, the ones Sir Charles was counting on, would become tangled in months, perhaps years, of litigation over corrupted records. By then, the Grand Majestic would be the Grand Eleanor. "You're destroying the company," I gasped, wiping sweat from my eyes. "No, Alistair," she corrected gently. "I am curing it of a terminal case of Alistair Finch. Your father was a visionary. You're a bureaucrat with expensive taste. You manage decline beautifully. I manage growth. Now, about that key card log." I fumbled for the emergency door release handle, my fingers slick. If I could just get out, I could physically reach security. "Those logs," she continued, ignoring my struggle. The ones you are so keen to see. I didn't just take a copy. I downloaded them, analyzed them, and then I fed them back into your internal HR system with a few minor targeted additions. You see, you were so focused on my late checkout fee that you missed your own misconduct. The elevator car gave another sickening lurch, dropping a few inches before catching itself again. The beep sound was getting slightly louder, more insistent. "What additions?" I whispered, leaning my head against the cool metal wall, suddenly too exhausted to fight the trap. "For instance, Alistair, remember that expense report from 3 months ago? The one for the urgent high-security meeting in Monaco that required that private jet charter? Well, the system now indicates that the jet was chartered under the guise of that meeting. Yes, but the manifest shows you were accompanied only by a certain Ms. Veronica Shaw, a temporary events coordinator whose contract was terminated 2 weeks later for inadequate performance. The newly integrated data suggests that your urgent meeting was actually a lovely little romantic interlude disguised as corporate espionage, a small violation of the executive conduct clause, wouldn't you say? Veronica Shaw. My mistake. A lapse in judgment I thought was safely buried under layers of corporate anonymity and expense padding. She had used my own self-serving inefficiency against me. That's a lie. I can explain the expense. You can try, she purred. But when the server melts, the paper trail burns with it, i.e. leaving only the digital shadow you left in the system this morning. I've cross-referenced that Monaco trip with the activity logs from your home network, Alistair. It seems Ms. Shaw also had access to several proprietary design schematics for the new Tokyo Tower, schematics you specifically told HR you were working on personally. It looks like corporate espionage facilitated by executive misconduct. The sheer, elegant cruelty of it stole my breath. She hadn't just bought the company, she had manufactured a legally damning case against me using my own past indiscretions as source material, timing the exposure to coincide precisely with the moment the company was changing hands. "Why?" I choked out. "Why go to all this trouble just to ruin me? It's a hotel chain. Why not just buy it cleanly?" The beep became a steady, rapid beep, 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 beep. The air in the elevator car was definitely getting warmer, the lemon scent of the lobby now replaced by a faint smell of hot metal. "Because, Alistair," Dr. Vance's voice cracked through the intercom, sounding almost triumphant, "your father made a choice 20 years ago. When he was securing initial funding for the Asian expansion, he was presented with 2 primary options for a strategic partner. One was a relatively young, ambitious woman with a small but disruptive venture capital firm. The other was the behemoth bank that eventually became your primary creditor. Your father chose the bank. He told the woman, me, that my enterprise wasn't established enough to handle the scale of the Grand Majestic. He looked down his nose at me. He didn't even remember my name by the time the contract was signed. A wave of nausea hit me. My father, he did that? He did. And for 20 years I built something larger, cleaner, and far more lethal than his little legacy. I didn't just want the company, Alistair. I wanted the final, undeniable moment where you, the gatekeeper who looked down on the woman who dared to build outside his established parameters, realized that you were standing in the shadow of the very person you dismissed. The rapid beeping intensified, becoming a frantic, high-pitched shriek that vibrated through the floor plates. The heat was becoming oppressive. I could practically smell the ozone from the overheating processors 3 floors down. "You have 5 minutes, Alistair," Dr. Vance said, her voice suddenly fading slightly, as if she were moving away from a static source. 5 minutes before the internal fire suppression system floods that entire sub-level with inert gas, which will permanently destroy the servers securing my narrative. If you want to save the historical records, if you want to save anything that proves your father's legitimate ownership, you have to get down there before the gas floods the room. And you are currently trapped in a metal box between floors. The shriek peaked. I slammed my shoulder against the door panel again, fueled by pure adrenaline and terror. The metal groaned. I saw a sliver of light appear as the door buckled. I had to choose, wait for rescue and accept ruin, or try to break out and potentially find myself in a flooded, gassed basement fighting against a woman who controlled the very air I breathed. With a final, desperate roar, I kicked the buckling seam. The elevator door exploded outward, not onto a smooth floor, but onto a sheer drop into the darker maintenance shaft below, the emergency lighting from the shaft floor far beneath me, casting long, grotesque shadows. I wasn't between floors anymore. I was staring down a vertical drop, the screech of the overworked safety brakes above me, the only thing stopping the car from plummeting the final 30 feet to the concrete floor of the server room, the room that was about to be flooded with inert gas in less than 5 minutes. The sight of the maintenance shaft below, a 30-foot plunge into darkness punctuated by the rhythmic, frantic beeping, was the ultimate irony. I was trapped, suspended by failing machinery, while my entire life's inheritance was being dissolved in a chemically inert atmosphere 3 floors down. There was no time for rational thought, only reflex. The screaming alarm from the intercom drowned out everything, but I focused only on the mechanical groans above me. The elevator car was hanging on by threads. I had seconds, not minutes, before the cables snapped or the brake mechanism failed completely. I threw my body against the gaping tear in the outer door panel. My Italian suit ripped with a sound like tearing canvas. I jammed my arm deep into the gap, feeling for anything. A manual release lever, a service hatch, anything that wasn't open air. My fingers brushed against cold steel. The emergency braking bar, designed to lock the car if the primary cables failed. It was agonizingly stiff, but it was my only anchor. With a grunt that tore through my chest, I hauled on the bar, throwing my entire weight into it. The elevator car protested with a terrible metallic shriek, and then, with a jolt that nearly snapped my wrist, it slammed hard against the shaft wall, settling with a jarring finality. The screaming alarm cut out, replaced by the steady, muffled beep, beep, beep from below. I had momentarily stabilized the cage, but I was still trapped inside. I forced myself to look up. Above me, where the maintenance hatch should have been, there was nothing but the smooth, sealed metal ceiling of the upper section. Dr. Vance hadn't just trapped me, she had sealed my escape route. I looked down again. The server room floor was still a terrifying void away. But if the gas was flooding in, I had to get there before the room became an airtight tomb. I looked at the remaining sliver of the door opening, enough space for a lean person to squeeze through sideways, provided they were willing to risk the drop. "Dr. Vance," I yelled down the shaft, my voice echoing weirdly. "You win the strategic battle, but I am not going to let you erase 2 decades of corporate history." There was no immediate reply, only the steady, agonizing count of the beeping timer. I knew the layout of the sub-levels by heart. The server room, B4, fed directly into the primary electrical conduit junction, B3, which was accessible via a service ladder behind the janitorial supply closet on B2. The floor I was currently near, just several feet away, if I could just get out of this box. I wedged my legs against the opposite wall of the elevator, took a deep breath of the increasingly warm air, and pushed. I squeezed through the ripped panel, my shoulder scraping painfully against the metal frame. I swung my legs out, found purchase on the rough concrete lip of the shaft opening, and dropped, landing hard on the maintenance catwalk that ran parallel to the elevator shaft, about 10 feet below the current car level. The air here was thick with dust and the smell of ozone. I scrambled toward the service door labeled B2, Electrical Access. It was locked, of course. My eyes scanned the immediate area. A fire extinguisher hung on the wall, useless for opening a heavy magnetic lock, but essential for what came next. I grabbed it, hefted its weight, and smashed the gauge end repeatedly against the magnetic lock housing. Sparks flew, the plastic casing shattered, and with a final, desperate blow, the metal housing buckled, and the door hissed open. I plunged into the narrow corridor of B2, sprinting toward the janitorial closet. My lungs were burning. I threw open the closet door. There was the ladder, leading down. I scrambled onto the first rung. "You're too late, Alistair," Dr. Vance's voice whispered from a hidden speaker somewhere near the ceiling. The beeping had stopped, replaced by a low, mechanical whoosh, the sound of inert gas displacing oxygen. I didn't slow. I threw myself down the ladder, my hands bleeding, reaching the B3 landing. The air here was already thin, making my head swim. I found the access panel to the main server room, B4. I could see faint light filtering from under the door, and I could hear the rush of escaping air as the suppression system worked. I kicked the access panel open, it was flimsy steel, and swung myself down into the server room. It was chaos. Cold air was mixing violently with the slow, suffocating plume of grey-white gas rolling across the floor like a dense fog bank. The racks of servers glowed an angry, erratic red. Dr. Vance was there, standing perfectly still near the main control panel, wearing a simple, elegant respirator mask. The only person in the room seemingly breathing comfortably. She hadn't left. She had waited for me to race into the kill zone. "Welcome to the endgame, Alistair," she said, her voice clear through the mask's modulator. "I knew you couldn't resist the urge to play the hero. You still think this is about the data, don't you? You think saving the paper trail saves you." The gas was already up to my knees, stinging my eyes. I knew I had seconds before I passed out. I ignored the servers, ignored the temptation to try and shield a drive. I lunged straight for her. "You think you've won everything, Doctor? You think I didn't have contingencies? My father might have been arrogant, but he didn't build an empire on sentiment. He built it on leverage." I swung the heavy fire extinguisher like a caveman. Dr. Vance, expecting a fight over the servers, reacted a fraction too slow. She sidestepped the main blow, but the base of the heavy metal cylinder caught her respirator mask, knocking it askew. Her eyes, wide with surprise, were suddenly exposed to the rapidly thinning oxygen and the corrosive gas. She choked, clutching at her throat, as momentarily blinded by pain and lack of air. Her hand fumbled backward, not toward a weapon, but toward the main control panel. I didn't swing again. Instead, I slammed the base of the extinguisher onto the single, glowing emergency cutoff switch on the panel, the button that would halt the inert gas flood and trigger the standard oxygen-based fire suppression system. The whooshing sound stopped instantly. The temperature began to rise again, but air flooded back into the room. Dr. Vance slumped against the console, gasping, clawing at the mask that had failed her when the pressure balance shifted. What have you done?" she wheezed, her previous composure shattered. "I didn't save the legacy data, Doctor," I coughed, leaning heavily against a server rack, easy pulling my own tie up over my nose and mouth in a useless gesture against the lingering fumes. "But I just triggered the emergency fire suppression protocol. That releases halon gas, which is non-corrosive, but violently displaces oxygen. It won't melt the drives, but it will flush this entire sub-level clear of everyone in the next 90 seconds. I stared at her, the victor in this desperate, dirty game. "You wanted leverage? You wanted to expose my arrogance? Fine. But my father always taught me one thing about high-stakes negotiations. Never negotiate in a room where you can't breathe." I didn't wait for her reply. I scrambled back up the ladder, leaving her to fight for air in the room she had tried to turn into my tomb. I didn't look back. When I finally dragged myself onto the ground floor lobby, gasping in the relatively clean air, Philip was there, pale but alive, speaking urgently into a radio. Security teams were swarming. Sir Charles Harrington arrived minutes later, his face grim. Dr. Vance was extracted, barely conscious, suffering from acute oxygen deprivation. The Grand Majestic retained its structural integrity. The servers were singed but salvageable. The takeover attempt failed not because the legal team moved fast enough, but because the aggressor had been temporarily neutralized by her own tactical trap. When the dust settled a week later, Sir Charles called me into his office. "You nearly bankrupted us, Alistair. You were arrogant, dismissive, and reckless," he began, his voice stern. "I know, Sir Charles. I apologize. I failed to recognize the true threat." He nodded slowly. "Indeed. Dr. Vance is in quiet recovery, under close surveillance. Her initial acquisitions have been legally frozen pending investigations into coercion and corporate endangerment. You saved the chain, Alistair. But I can't have arrogance at the top. I need a manager who is aggressive, yes, but also respectful of unseen power." He steepled his fingers, looking over the panoramic view of London, the view I thought I'd lose forever. "I'm promoting you, Alistair. Effective immediately. You are no longer general manager of the London flagship. You are now the global head of corporate security and risk assessment. Your first task will be to identify every single potential vulnerability, every hidden line of leveraged debt, every shadow partner that could ever leverage a spa fee into a hostile takeover. You will spend the rest of your career learning why you never insult the quiet woman waiting in the lobby,